right. Good evening. Today is June 2nd, 2020. It is now 5:39 p.m. Sorry for running a little bit late, but as is often the case, we're trying to make sure we have all our ducks in a row. Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone is fine and is feeling blessed and is safe. We wish we could say that for the rest of the country, although it appears that things have settled down a bit in terms of violence. It does appear that our community, our nation, seems to having to continue to endure some level of unrest. But under the circumstances, it seems to be warranted. That is the unrest. The unrest is compelled, as many of you know, by circumstances, not just as of late, but over the decades, the centuries. How people of color have been mistreated and abused has come to a head once again. My hope, my prayer, and I'm sure this is shared by my colleagues, that we finally figure out a way to productively and effectively deal with this scourge of racism. I don't have a lot of hope, but my belief is that if we don't continue to work at a solution, this Groundhog Day that we experience relating to racism is going to repeat itself over and over again. And people, good people, are going to die, and good people are going to lose hope. We are part of the solution, that is, educators. And so we know that the work we do can result in a community and a nation that is freed from racism, particularly where we have the right teachers and the right pedagogy, the right leaders in front of our children. So that's what we're about tonight. And the hope and prayer is that part of the solution will be discussed tonight in terms of how we educate and how we lead our schools. Having said that, we also begin each meeting with a recitation to the Pledge of Allegiance. Seems particularly appropriate now, given the fact that we have to find ourselves united under this flag if we're ever to get something resolved. So join me, if you will. Stand, take a knee, sit in silence as I recite on behalf of my colleagues the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have a very heavy schedule tonight, and to my colleagues, I'll apologize in advance. I'm still sort of getting adjusted to this new normal. If I miss you raising your hand, just shout out that you're there and you want to have an opportunity to speak, but we'll do our best, as we always do. Next item on the agenda is speakers list, and I'm told by our clerk that we have no speakers tonight. Is that correct?
That is correct, President White.
All right, thank you. And next item on our agenda is to discuss a number of topics that are of importance to this district. And to lead that discussion, we'll have our superintendent, Dr. Myers. Leslie, you there?
I am. Thank you, President White. So the first thing that I'd like to discuss is certainly just recent efforts on behalf of the district relative to what happened over the weekend. So we know that on Saturday, there was a rally relative to the outcry and injustice, not only to the murder of George Floyd, but also past injustices to Black and Brown people. We also know that the rally started peacefully and then unfortunately took a violent turn. This happened in our community, our Rochester community, and so many of our children and families either experienced the violence that ensued or saw it on social media, and it certainly was broadcast on television. And so we know that many individuals, including myself, experienced trauma. So on Sunday, I convened my cabinet twice during the day, and then once in the morning and then in the evening, so we could just discuss the facts, then share individual and collective information from our varied perspectives in the organization, and then develop action plans. Excuse me. I would like to pause and certainly thank all of our staff who participated in the citywide cleanup, because I know that there were many people involved, and it's my understanding that some board members, some of our commissioners were actually involved as well. But within that, many of us were not able to participate in that cleanup. So I just want to make sure that our public is clear, our community is clear that the reason why we did not from the cabinet is because we were developing action plans to ensure that our students and our families were supported. So I just want to go over very briefly what did that support and what were those action plans, what did they entail? So after we met as a cabinet, our chief of schools met in their networks and they had conversations with principals really to do a check-in, connect. And honestly, some of those interactions were very emotional because we needed to check in with our principals to see how they were doing. Some of them have Black sons. And so we wanted to make sure that our leaders were, that we checked in with them to just see how they were doing. We also wanted to ensure that they were prepared to have conversations with their respective staff members and that they were prepared to interact with students and they were prepared to interact with families. Under the direction of Ruth Turner, we also put plans in place. You know that we have food sites, 13 across the district. And so we had in-person support that was provided in shifts by trauma practitioners from 8 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. That happened yesterday as well as today. The support team provided diffusing circles per the TIG, which stands for trauma, illness, and grief processes. And so these are one-to-one supports that adhere to the social distancing practices that have been established locally and have been outlined by our governor. So masks and safety precautions were utilized. We also developed a resource guide of questions and support statements because we know as our teachers were interacting with students in Zoom rooms or in other venues that we wanted to make sure that teachers and others had resources and information to help support our students. We also dedicated our support line, the 262-8700 number, to provide information. We had individuals personing that. So if the people needed to call, students needed to call, or families needed to call, we had a live connection there. There were also daily Zoom meeting times for our staff requiring direction and supports. And on Sunday, I called and made connection with all of our union presidents to make sure that they were aware of this, the direction that we were taking and that supports were available for our staff and our respective units. And I failed to mention, we just did a check and connect with the superintendent's cabinet, our SEG group, to just see how individuals were doing there. We continue to monitor and adjust all of these efforts. And again, the bottom line was, whether you were trained or well-versed in talking about trauma as a result of racism and injustice, the bottom line for us was that we just made connections and that we listened and that we were there for students. So again, we continue to monitor to see if we need to have more support or we maintain where it is, or if we can drop off a little bit. But that in a nutshell was how we responded to what happened on Saturday. And certainly it's not just relegated to Saturday. There's been past injustice, as I've mentioned. And so we wanted to make sure that we had an action plan moving forward to support students and families. And just the only other thing is we did send information to the city of Rochester so we could coordinate our efforts and to make sure that they were aware of these resources and services that we were providing in our district. That's the report in a nutshell. There's a lot to it, but being mindful of time.
Any questions to the superintendent regarding that aspect of her report? I don't see any on my screen, and I don't see anybody raise their hand. So, Dr. Myers, you have another report on Monroe Lower and Upper?
I do. I'm going to just set this up and turn this portion over to Deputy Superintendent Quick and Chief of Schools Amy Shavi, just to provide an update in response to additional information needed to moving forward relative to this. So I will turn it over to them, and they also have a PowerPoint presentation, just very few slides, but has good information for you all to take a look at.
Thank you, Dr. Myers. I just want to point out Amy is on the screen, Chief Amy Shavi. And Sandra, I believe you are on as well.
Yes, sorry, I failed to mention that.
No, that's fine. I just want to point that out. We'll keep this very brief because I would point out on May 7th via Marisol, we did share the Monroe Upper Lower plan with you. So this is a follow-up to that conversation and to address a couple of very specific questions that had been prompted by that plan and our conversation. So if you go to the next slide, I just want to point out the level of involvement of the community, staff, and chief, as well as all the people that you see here in the development of our reconfiguration of Monroe High. Students, families, our admin team, school-based planning team, NYSED, State Ed Department, of course, was involved in this process as well and gave their endorsement and encouragement for this, our community engagement teams, as well as teachers and staff. Sandra is here. She was an instrumental part of putting this plan together along with Chief Shavi. And I can't stress enough about how much thought and input they received from others in developing this plan so that Monroe Upper and Lower are successful in this transition. The next slide has a little bit to do with communication. I just want to walk through a little bit of the communication timeline and the whole process for how we went about this transition and the suggestion for transition of Monroe Upper Lower and what we have done to date and what we are suggesting needs to be done before school opens this fall. So going back as early as fall 2019, the Executive Cabinet did discuss possible reconfiguration of Monroe Upper Lower. So it was on the radar screen and part of discussion points as early as fall. In January, the superintendent Dade at the time presented to the board about school configurations, and this was part of that. Monroe High School was part of that conversation. There were meetings after that January presentation and letters to families that communicated the superintendent's plan to reconfigure. Then February through, one more, back to the February through March timeframe. Kelly, if we can go back one. Sorry, February through May. During this time period for the last 3 months, we've communicated out our plans with State Ed. We have done the building configurations. Obviously, I want to pull Sandra into this conversation a little bit. She can nod or just be a part of listening, and maybe Amy can jump in. Our school-based planning team, along with Principal Sandra Blackman, did discuss and plan for the transition and gave you the plan from May 7th that you received via email, a very thoughtful plan that will drive the work from this point forward until September. And on the next slide, I want to point out that we did consider and have been considering what the communication is from this point forward. And Amy, if you want to jump in here and cover the June, July, August time period.
Sure. Good evening, board commissioners. So the timeframe communication timeline from this point forward right now, and looking at the presentation of the transition plan to staff, to families, and to the community, really is about this is what has been done, and this is what we will continue to do. With the virtual meetings and working with our staff, working with our families, also continuing to engage. Sandra has an amazing relationship, I should say, Principal Shavali Blackman, with her community engagement team. The Bilingual Council is very active. Ibero is a huge supporter of Monroe, and the Office of Parent Engagement. So collectively working together to continue to communicate the desires of the vision of Monroe and raise student voice in what is happening currently at Monroe, but also what are the desires moving forward for Monroe, because our students have been very, very vocal in wanting some different supports at the 9th grade for the academy, a separation between the middle level and the high school. So again, in July, we're working with Ibero to host a meeting to present the transition plan and work in collaboration as a community partner, as a co-host, blast out information through social media, through the website, and making sure that all of our communication is meeting the needs of all of our receiving individuals. In August, after the leadership team is established, a welcome letter from the lower school principal to families and students, and obviously a continued collaborative communication from both principals to the school community and staff. So I do just want to, on the next slide, just say that the leadership team at Monroe Lower, one principal, one assistant principal, senior leadership team is right now working in collaboration with human resources. And once we have a final determination on the principal placements, obviously that communication will come forward. So that is definitely front and center and very important to everyone who is working on that. I would be remiss if I did not say to you, Commissioner LeBron, on screen, because I don't know if I'll have the opportunity again, thank you for your advocacy for Monroe. You have been amazing, mental, and steadfast in your advocacy, not only for Monroe, but for the community and the bilingual programming. So it has been an honor to work beside you, and I have every confidence that the students at Monroe and all students will continue to receive services. And I know in speaking with Sandra just today again, she feels very supported by you and the leadership moving forward. So thank you.
Any questions for us?
I don't see any, Deputy Superintendent Quick. I would add
Beatrice.
I don't see her on the, again, I just asked folks to raise their hand. I can't see Beatrice in the Brady Bunch view. So now I see her hand just being raised on the log here. So go ahead, Beatrice.
Yeah, so I was trying to pull it up, but it wasn't on the screen originally.
Okay.
You moved kind of quickly to the next part. One, I do want to say thank you to Amy, because I know that Amy is going to be leaving us, and I want to thank her for her advocacy and her work. And the data that stands with Amy wherever she goes is that a lot of the schools that Amy was the chief for had some of the strongest data and turnaround in our district. And I know that took a lot of work from those schools and the leadership, but also her leadership as well. So I want to thank her for her work. I do have a question on the one principal and the one assistant principal for Lower Monroe. A lot of the work that has gone into Monroe and the team that is there, one, they work well together. They are very supportive. They listen to their leadership. They support one another in the decisions. And I just have a small concern about putting in a principal and an assistant principal and what that looks like in terms of having two leaders leading one building when they have worked as a group, and what would be, I guess, the solutions for any problems that may arise with personalities, because I don't want to pretend that doesn't exist in the district. It absolutely does. And if we've had that foresight conversation about how will we problem solve that moving forward.
It's a great question, Commissioner LeBron, and I think Amy can jump in as well. I think we really have thought this through with regard to the need to have a principal for each of the schools. And we are very confident that the principals will be working together and will both be looking out for the best interests of the children as they coexist in the building. But I do think that we have a strength in the current leadership at upper that will carry over into lower and will help us with this transition. And I think actually will help it to be more successful for the future. Amy, you might want to jump in as well.
I do want to say, and I want to echo what Commissioner LeBron had said, and I know Sandra and I have had many conversations, and what I can say is that the beauty in this has been to my chief colleagues. They're probably sick of hearing me say too, please, please, and they know this, and to our superintendent, and I know she knows because she's sat in some conversations when we did reviews with Monroe. There is such an appreciation, and Sandra, I'll say this to you on screen right now. Your leadership is valued. You have moved Monroe mountains, and your heart and soul is in this. And so, Commissioner LeBron, to you too, that please know the advocacy to continue the vision at Monroe with Sandra at the high school is of the utmost importance. And I am confident in what Sandra has put together with her team, that there is no way anyone is going to let that change, no matter who goes in that lower. And we worked really hard to look at how personalities would come together to support and collaborate together. So Sandra, you're amazing, and I know that under your leadership at the high school, Monroe will continue to excel. And Commissioner LeBron, I appreciate your passion, and I'm looking forward to seeing where Monroe will go. And thank you.
Okay, I'm looking at the participant list and I don't see any other hands raised. So I will add my 2 cents. Sandra, as a number of people have said, your work at Monroe has been incredible. And you've done that, I know some folks know, despite some challenges that you've had relating to your health and the commitment that you've had. And also, I would say it seemed that things didn't continue on that path when you were absent there. And that's a credit to the wonderful commitment that you have to those students. But since you've been back, as Commissioner LeBron said, while we cannot judge everything and we should not judge everything by the numbers suggest that you really are on a path that is very productive and positive for not only for the students of Monroe, but for this entire district. So we look forward to you continuing to move those mountains as Amy has suggested. And to Amy, again, I think the numbers as well suggest that you have moved this district forward at a number of schools. And while we should not judge everything by the numbers, it is the life that we live. It's the setup that has been given to us where all of us are judged, at least in part by important indicators. And you clearly, in your role as chief, have moved this district in the right direction. Now, some of my colleagues and I were accused of using humor. We shouldn't use humor in some of these meetings, but I got to say to Amy, and I know Ruth Turner is listening. Now, what Amy and Ruth are not good at, I'm sorry for people who don't like us to joke around, but I'm gonna do it anyway. What Amy and Ruth are not good at is cards. We went away to Harvard one time to learn about being educators. And any of y'all ever played the game War?
You're
I know
so
you
wrong.
have.
You are absolutely wrong right now.
No. Wait a second. I have the floor. Thank you very much. Amy and Ruth are terrible at the game of War. And they will tell you at another time how good I am at the game of War. I'm sort of the Michael Jordan. So Amy and Ruth, at some other time, perhaps you'd like to challenge the war champion. Amy, you have anything you want to say about that, or are you on mute?
Oh, I'm gone. I have to remember I'm on public television right now. So.
Ruth, do you care to add your 2 cents? I guess not. So, I see you there.
No, but I will catch you offline.
All right, so that's good news. That's good news. All right, so our next, Ruth, you mad at me? No, you can't be mad at me. Is she frozen? I think she's frozen. That's good. All right, so our next item on the
No,
agenda.
I'm not frozen.
Oh, you're not frozen? You sure
No.
you don't want to have your opportunity to say something about my game?
Absolutely not. But you absolutely know what I'm thinking. Right now, you're taking advantage of the fact that you have the floor. So I will correct it in due time.
Okay, all right. All right, next item on the agenda is resolutions for consideration. I need a motion to discuss resolution 954. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Been moved by Commissioner Adams. Or a second?
Seconded.
I hear Commissioner Malloy. Any questions or comments regarding resolution 954? I don't see anybody raising their hands on the participant log. There being no, yes, Commissioner LeBron?
Yeah, I was trying to find the resolutions on the attachment that was sent, but it's not worded as resolutions. So if we can pull them up on the screen.
Madison, you put that up on the screen?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
All right. This is the resolution, by the way, for those, she pulls it up, that deals with the independent monitor. So I'll give you all a chance to, if you haven't had a chance to review it already, opportunity to review that. And then if there are any questions or comments regarding that resolution, we'll take them at that time.
Okay, thank you, Van. I actually, these came in last week, so I just didn't know which number we were on.
Yep, 954. Any questions or comments regarding resolution 954? There being no questions or comments. Yeah, yes. Did somebody say something?
Yeah, I did. I have like all these screens up. I'm trying to figure out where my hand is, but yeah, I did want to make the comment that I won't personally drag this out any further. I still did have concerns with the contract in regards to what our independent monitors' role is going to be here and the powers that they have in conjunction with the pay rate. And so for that concern, I am going to be voting no on this resolution tonight.
Any other questions or comments regarding resolution 954? There being no additional questions or comments, all those in favor of resolution 954, make sure you're on screen and indicate by saying yes or yay. Aye.
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 Got that, Madam Clerk? Aye. You're good?
No.
We're good?
No for me.
Yes,
And
we
there's-
have to call for nays, please.
Yep. And Commissioner Shepherd indicated a no. We're good?
Yes.
Again, just for those listening, if we have our clerk recording the vote, and so long as she doesn't tell me, Van, you gotta take another vote because you're short, I'm assuming, based on her visualization on the Zoom screen, that there are enough yeses. The technology is such that, you know, all of us don't always see everybody on the screen. So long as she is recording the votes, which is what's required under the bylaws, we're good. And if there aren't sufficient votes, she will let me know. All right, next we need to put on the floor resolution 955. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And moved by Commissioner Malloy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Any questions or comments regarding resolution 955? That is Commissioner Malloy. Yep.
I'm wondering if Anissa can just tell the public what the cost savings is expected to be if this is adopted.
From the cost of the actual claims auditors, is that what the question is?
Well, Anissa, if you could just explain very briefly how you came about to have this number on there, because there is some savings associated with that, and you should point that out.
Okay, there was an estimate, and I don't have directly in front of me. It'll take me a moment to look at the exact figure. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 260 is the general cost of the existing 3 claims auditors with fully loaded benefit rates. And so I know it was the desire of the board to explore outsourcing out of the desire to have some potential cost savings in that particular area. We did have an RFP process and received 3 bids. The bid before you, or the resolution before you, is from Nyraki Smith. They did have an initial bid that was about $175,770 per year. We did engage in conversations about both providing the board the best and final offer they had available, as well as their desire to support the Board of Education in providing quality claims audit services and being a partner with the board. We were very pleased. I was very excited about the conversation I was able to have, and we were able to then have a resulting annual fee of $151,555. So it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 a year. Should we continue with this particular vendor over the 5-year period. So that is what the resulting is. I think on an annual basis, we'll save $24,215, somewhere in that neighborhood per year, and over the course of the contract, over $100,000.
I see Commissioner LeBron raising her hand, and then Commissioner Adams.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I do want to thank Anissa, our general auditor, for putting into the work of creating the RFP and feeling it out and going through the process of bringing down some of the best requests for proposals that kind of came back in. So, and renegotiating the original asking price that this company put out there. I look forward to working with them. I want to thank our claims auditors who have worked in the district for the last couple of years. I do believe this is the right thing for the board to do, primarily for effectiveness and efficiency, and hopefully this will address some of the previous audits from the state that have come back around this area that we have not been compliant with. So this is my hope, and I'll definitely be monitoring the work and see how it goes from here. So thank you, Anissa.
Welcome.
Commissioner Adams.
Yes, I just want to take my hat off to Anissa. I would like to see her on the district's negotiating team. She did a great job, and I just had to give you a shout out for that.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams, Commissioner Malloy, and Commissioner LeBron. I share your appreciation for Anissa's work. She took this project on, and as she always does, she went in it like gangbusters, got us a really good deal, and we think a good service by a good provider. So we look forward to working with this new firm. I should also add that we are also appreciative of the work of our folks who for years did this work on behalf of the district. And sometimes it may have appeared to be a thankless job because people are always so critical of money, as they should, and how it's being spent in the district. These 3 employees, I spoke to their leader today, Deborah Manns, and like all deserving employees, this board will recognize them at an appropriate time for their years of service. And many of them labored through some very challenging times and never let this district down. So we will recognize you all. If you happen to be watching, Deborah, Donna, Rosa, we appreciate you, and we do thank you for your service to this district. All right, if there are no further comments or questions, we'll vote on Resolution 955. I'm looking at my participant list and I don't see anybody else raising their hand. So all those in favor of Resolution 955 indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? Seems to be that the ayes have it, Madam Clerk. That resolution passes. Thanks again, Anissa. We really do appreciate your work. I understand that Dr. Myers, you have a resolution that you're walking on this evening. Is that right?
I do. Yes, President White, thank you. Resolution 956, which was circulated to our commissioners, and it's relative to the reorganization of the SEG group.
Are there, that is Resolution 956. Is there a motion to discuss Resolution 956?
Motion.
Been moved by Commissioner Malloy. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. Any questions or comments for our Superintendent, Dr. Myers, on Resolution 956? Thank you. I think it's Marisol putting it on the screen for us today. It lists the SEG group as an Appendix A. Any questions or comments to our Superintendent regarding 956?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
If our Superintendent Myers, if you could just quickly point out what the cost savings will be with this resolution, because I know you had said there was a cost savings. I want to make sure that the public understands that although it looks like you're adding to SEG, that there is some cost savings involved.
There is, Commissioner Malloy, and I apologize, I wasn't prepared for that question, so I don't have that exact number, but I can figure out how to make sure that's communicated. I apologize.
Just
But
as
there
a
is it is important to know it is a cost savings.
And just as a follow-up to that question, we just, as everybody knows, we just passed a budget. Again, thank you, Deputy Superintendent Quick.
Yes.
For that work. Dr. Myers, this Resolution 956 won't affect that budget proposal that is now before City Council in a negative way, is that right?
No, I mean, that is correct.
That is correct. All right, any other questions regarding 956? Yes, Commissioner LeBron?
I just want to clarify that it's not technically a cost savings, but that that our superintendent stayed within her budget and there was some savings realized, but that savings is going to be absorbed in another part of our budget. So I don't want it to make it look like we're saving all, money that we technically don't have. It is being utilized in another area and was created with that thought process in mind. And I do want to say that publicly and on the record, because I do appreciate the thoughtfulness of our superintendent, not just the restructuring of it, because I may not personally agree with all of it, but I am supporting my superintendent. But I do really genuinely appreciate the thoughtfulness of not just the cost savings that were realized, but also understanding that there needed to be some cost savings because of other contractual things that are occurring within the district. And so I appreciate that. And I just wanted that on the record.
I too want to add my voice of appreciation. The term thoughtfulness is a good word for what has happened here, Dr. Myers. And also the short period of time within which you exercise that thoughtful judgment. I unfortunately, or for some may say fortunately, have been around to observe good superintendents. When they come in, they need about a 90-day period or walk around period or a study period or an assessment, and that's very reasonable. I've seen lots of superintendents in this district and outside this district do that. You didn't do that. And I'm speculating is because you knew exactly what you thought would help this district. You also understood the importance of getting people in place and moving this district forward and continuing to see some positive indications on key performance areas. So I just want to thank you not only for, and I realize that change sometimes can be difficult, but you exercised the courage to get that done. And two, you didn't take a lot of time to do that when other good superintendents take more time to do it. Notwithstanding that fact, I think you made some excellent choices, and that is truly appreciated. Any other questions? Any other questions or comments regarding Resolution 956? There being no further questions or comments, all those in favor of Resolution 956 say aye.
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 Any opposition? You have any unanimous vote there, Dr. Myers? Good job.
President White?
Yes, ma'am. Is that Commissioner Powell?
It is. Thank you.
Yep.
At this point, I just want to reiterate my request to have the org chart posted online where our policy manual is as an exhibit, and any other related materials the superintendent might want to put up there, such as which members of SEG are also members of her cabinet versus the below the dotted line.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Thank you, Dr. Myers. We now are moving on to the next portion of our agenda, which is new business, if any, and there is. Some of you who've been watching board meetings know that we have recognized, particularly during this pandemic, what we call heroes of hope, people in this district that have moved this district forward in very personal and direct ways, because the Board of Education understands that the real change that is needed in this district doesn't necessarily happen from 131 West Broad Street, but happens from teachers and cafeteria people and custodians and principals. And we try to, when we can, recognize those folks as the real heroes. Today, we recognize Melissa Sample. She is our hero of hope. Now you might ask why. Ms. Samples is a long-term ELL sub-teacher. She is one of Rochester City School District's Heroes of Hope, as she works at Early Childhood School number 57. Ms. Samples works every day with children, even in this very difficult situation that we find ourselves. She assists in ways that you might think are somewhat unconventional. She grocery shops for our children and our families, not just during weekdays, but on weekends when she is providing and moving her own family forward. She understands that it is the whole child 7 days a week that needs to be serviced by our district. And in fact, she uses the whole child health grant fund to do that. But I gotta tell you, she's a very unusual hero insofar as she will move heaven and earth to make a difference in a child and a family's life at a moment's notice. Ms. Sample, by way of example, drops off groceries to families in need. And in fact, on one occasion, when one teacher, looks like, I think she broke her knee, Ms. Samples delivered what that teacher needed to her home so that teacher could provide what her students needed in their homes. And she's done even more than that. She has taken the initiative to get, check this out, gift cards from her church so that families in the district could go grocery shopping. More than 5 families, as a result of Ms. Sample's work and love for this district and its families, were able to go grocery shopping to buy groceries and cleaning supplies for their homes. Ms. Samples, the Board of Education, and our Superintendent of Schools, thank you. We praise you, we appreciate you for your hard work and your dedication to the Rochester City School District, and most importantly, its children. And finally, I would thank Principal Eva Thomas. You are a hero for identifying a hero within our district. If anybody has any other heroes of hope, I've encouraged my colleagues to submit them. As you can see, the wonderful families that are blessed by our heroes, people in the community or people at central office. If you know of a hero, particularly during this pandemic, going above and beyond the call of duty, please share that information with us here at the district, and we will make sure that the good work, the love and appreciation for this district is shared with others. All right, next item on the agenda is the Policy Committee meeting, unless there's any other new business. I'm looking at the participant list. I think we're good there. So I'm now going to convene a meeting of the Policy Committee. I happen to chair that committee, so I will note that it is still June 2nd. It is 6:23 p.m. Folks, we are actually ahead of schedule. This meeting was supposed to start till 6:30, but I don't assume anybody will have any objection to me starting 7 minutes early. We will begin by a review and acceptance of the March 3rd, 2020 Policy Committee meeting minutes.
President White?
Yes, ma'am.
On that topic, I would prefer that we not vote yes or no on that. I note that I expected to see under new business my request regarding policy 2160, that we had begun the conversation but could not finish it, and I saw nothing at all on that topic in the minutes. And I would prefer, if my colleagues would indulge us, that something about that discussion be added to the minutes and represented to us next time.
I get it. I was going to say, we are going to get to your proposed topic, but you're saying it's not referenced in the minutes, and it should have been.
Right. In fact, there would have been a lot less confusion about this month's
Right.
agenda if, in fact, there had been some historical record that it had come up in the previous meeting.
And I should, as by way of background, I was talking to our clerk about how this ended up on the agenda, and you're right, it wasn't in the minutes, so there was really no context in which to say, well, I was like, well, why are we putting this on at the last minute? And the reason why we were putting this on was it wasn't the last minute. The last time Commissioner Powell, my colleagues will recall, brought this up, it was at a policy committee meeting, and we said, let's make sure people have the time to review what she wants to discuss, and we'll put it off for the next meeting. So when I realized that in fact was what happened, I said to our clerk, no, we need to have this on the agenda for today because Commissioner Powell had already waited previously. So we won't vote on those minutes. We'll have somebody revise them. Kalia, I assume you're listening, you can revise them for us, and we can present those minutes when we get to the next policy committee meeting. But we'll continue on with our agenda. And then the last item that I have would be, well, actually, it's on the agenda, the Code of Ethics Policy 2160. All right, so next item on the agenda is review of the policy update chart. Carl, are you here for that? Carl, will you be presenting? Who will be presenting on that? It's
muted, Carl.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. Kalia and I can probably present together concerning it because she was good enough to update the chart after she and I and Marisol had a conversation to discuss it. I'm sure the commissioners will recognize the chart. We do have it in a little different order than it was before, at least the redraft of it is. And this is the redraft that's up on the screen right now. What we are going to suggest is that at least the first 4 items on the chart continue to be the first 4 priorities for the board. The code of conduct, of course, we're all very well familiar with and getting ready to engage in a further discussion of the recommendations of the special committee that reviewed it. And I would hope that at the next policy meeting, that will be the first item. Following that, the next item in terms of priority is probably the policy on student attendance. The reason why is that there's been previous work done by the committee on this policy, so it's really pretty well positioned to be considered and adopted in a fairly big hurry, if you will. It's just something that's been around for quite a while, and we probably ought to dispose of it. The third piece.
Also, 1 second. I'm sorry to interrupt, Carla. I also want to point out that the student attendance policy, there has been a NISBA update that was recently announced in March 2020 with regard to student attendance, perfect attendance, given the COVID pandemic, and that is something that we would like to address in the policy as well. So you'll see March 2020 is highlighted in green there to show that that was the latest update that's been recommended to that policy.
Thanks a lot, Kalia. I actually had that noted and didn't read it. Thank
No
you
problem.
very much. Yes, that NISBA update, particularly considering the time through which we're living at the moment, is a pretty apt one and something that the committee should undertake. But still, I think that the code of conduct is the main piece here. The third piece is one that we actually removed because it was decided by the committee that the whistleblower policy per se is not in need of revision. But it was resolved that it would be a good idea to have a superintendent's regulation on that topic, and I understand that the administration is going to be undertaking that. The fourth one is the purchasing policy, which I know a number of the commissioners have expressed interest in at least reviewing. Not necessarily is it in need of update, because it's not all that old, if you will, having been last adopted in 2013. There's not a lot of change in the law that has happened since then. But I know that there is certainly a lot of interest in at least taking a look at it, and I would suggest that you do that next. The next piece has to do with AIS, or Academic Intervention Services. And that's kind of an old topic, but why I think it is somewhat current and under our current circumstances is that the topic in parentheses that you'll see below it called compensatory education. That's going to be a very big topic going forward, especially in the area of special education, while we have been trying to do the best we can to deliver services to our special education population during this COVID-19 crisis. The delivery of those services may or may not have, in some folks' view, been sufficient. And to the extent that it may not have been, compensatory services are what we are supposed to do to make up for any deficit in that regard. And then the final one is one that we pulled off of the NYSBA updates that are also listed on the agenda, and that Kalia will probably address in a little bit. And that has to do with student data privacy. Mm-hmm. And the update there is that since the policy was first adopted, the education law was amended by adding a section 2D dealing with student privacy. So beyond just the federal statute that deals with the topic, we now have a state statute, and we should at least ensure that the policy is consistent with this more recent state development. So those are sort of the first six. The remainder of the chart is something that I would suggest that the board as a policy committee and the administration undertake to perhaps determine some priorities to sort of triage this list. The only thing I would point out in this regard is if you get to the third page of the list, particularly, you will see policies that haven't been paid attention to in over 20 years. And it certainly seems to me that between now and then, there may have been a lot of changes and a lot of updates. And certainly as we go past these, first more priority issues, that the work needs to continue to, bring this policy manual up to date. So that, in I guess rather a large nutshell, is an overview of the policy update plan.
The secondary piece to that is also if you look at the chart, the executive cabinet assignment, and the chart will note the positions of persons who have traditionally addressed these policies or helped to work with board staff to help to address these policies. And given that we have a new organizational chart and a new superintendent, that is also something to be considered, as we will need to reassign based on how the organizational chart now is represented. So I'm hoping to work with the administration on identifying who, as board staff, we can work with, and you'll see it similarly in the next chart that is shared as well. We'll need to consider those things.
Thank you for addressing that at the appropriate time. I was going to say that.
Okay, thank you. The other piece is also the date to be presented to the board. Once the person who has been assigned, the executive cabinet person has been assigned, that will be something that will be decided upon, and then the board will be appropriately notified of when they will receive the policies for review, or when they can accept those policies for review in the policy committee meetings. Okay. The next chart that Marisol is going to bring onto the screen is the board policy deliverables matrix. But if there are any questions regarding the update chart, Carl and I can address those. No questions. Okay, Marisol.
I'm having some technical difficulties, so if you could give me 1 second. I'm sorry, Kalia, can you start talking about that, please?
Sure. So the board policy deliverables matrix, there are several policies that are in the policy manual for the board that have action items attached, whether that be reports, whether that be presentations that are linked within the policy to keep the board abreast of what is taking place on administratively and in the schools. And so you now see it in front of you. This is something that we are working to update. Last year, the policy deliverables matrix, there are some of these reports that have not yet been presented. So we have updated the timeline for presentation of these. And so we are hoping to also identify the responsible person if those titles are going to be changed. That is something that I'll need to work with administration with regard to, and also what is the deadlines are standard based on the policy. So that is set in stone, but really when it will be submitted to the board. And generally that is general counsel will receive it 3 weeks prior to the board meeting, and then they'll be presented at whichever board meeting. And you'll see the policies that are affiliated there.
Could I chime in and just say that this table has been refined over the years, and I really like where it has landed. In the early days, some of the vagueness in the language of the policy deliverable requirement itself made it difficult to sort out when a report was due, or it had to be renegotiated every year with the superintendent. And I think that we've landed on a process that's compatible for both the board's needs and the administration's needs. So I like where we've gotten, and I appreciate the staff support that's gotten us there.
Let me just add real quickly. I want to note, I know she's probably not listening, Deborah Flanagan, who began a lot of this work. This is the chart that you see in front of you that Commissioner Powell has indicated has changed over the years. A lot of this work began with Deborah Flanagan, who retired, I think, this year. So if she's listening, or if anybody knows her, tell her that her work is really bearing fruit now.
We will definitely relay the message. And she before she left, was really great at working with policy. That is something that I've absorbed in my duties, and something that I'm working with NISBA on, and hoping to really help the board get up to date with a lot of these things. Policies change frequently, and we have a lot of them. So, and NISBA does provide policy update recommendations on a monthly basis. So it is very hard to keep track of, but we are, of course, many of our policies, I will say, in talking with Carl, we do touch base on these things. Not all of them, all of the recommended changes have to be made, but it is important that we do keep things in mind, and that we do address where needed. And we can only do that if we have a plan. So thanks to Deborah, and we do hope to continue doing that. Were there any questions on this deliverables matrix at all?
I do have a question, and maybe this is more that we need to take offline, but there are a lot that are due at the end of the month. I need to see what the what it's looked like before. Not that I'm not trying to get out of work, but I just want to make sure that I give a quality report to the board. So I think I'm going to need just to understand what is the specific expectation and see what has previously been presented, and then I may need a little bit of leeway moving forward. So just wanted to put that on the record.
Wonderful. So I will, hopefully we can touch base and we can identify when the reporting will restart. I think in talking in our preview policy committee meeting, which we do have, we identified that for the next academic year, we would restart the process because, you know, we are coming out of one school year and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to make that deadline given the expectations right now and the challenges that the district is facing, but we want to make sure that we start as soon as possible with getting those things in, since we are missing a few deadlines.
Understood.
Kalia, what Dr. Myers, what we have done in the past is, of course, as you know, we have committees, and then traditionally the superintendent has assigned a staff person to the committee. Sometimes it's one, maybe two people. And on top of that, what that person does is that person reports to superintendent and keeps them informed of the deadlines, make sure that there's a designated person held responsible for that particular policy. And then that person works with Kalia. The other thing that I think would be extremely helpful, and of course we can and should amend the timeframes to accommodate that, but I guess whoever you designate with Kalia can figure out how we prioritize those things. Carl has been involved because, you know, these things have many of these policies have legal implications. The whole goal was several years ago, we looked at our policy book and we concluded that many of the things that we prior boards had asked for, nobody was really paying any attention to. So there were calls for annual reports and nobody was doing them. By way of example, Bohan Vargas was on our Board of Education in like 1997, and he drafted along with his colleagues this small schools policy. Small schools policy required that the administration issue annual reports in terms of their compliance with small schools. And fast forward 2008, we looked at it and we said, how many reports have we gotten on the small schools policy since Bohan was on the board? And at that point, he was superintendent, and we got 0 reports. So the idea here was if you're going to say you're going to do something, let's make sure we do it. So we went through the whole policy manual. This is where Deborah's work really began, and got rid of stuff that the board didn't need anymore. But we committed ourselves to making sure that if we said we were going to do something, we were going to do it. So that's how Carl and Kalia find themselves in a position to ask these things of you now.
Okay, and then, so the next thing is with regard to the NYSBA policy updates. As I said, NYSBA does frequently send recommended policy changes. The most recent ones that I think the board should be really aware of, and I will continue to do this during policy, is make the board aware of pertinent policies that NYSBA has recommended. There are others, but Carl and I and Marisol discussed, and these are the ones we want to make the board aware of. These policies we don't currently have on the docket, and it would be the board's direction if you would like us to think about or direct us to make a policy or to draft a policy with regard to those. I did already talk to you about the student attendance policy, which we do have, which is to modify to address the perfect attendance. If you give us the directive, we will go ahead and move to add that to the attendance policy draft that will be next coming to the policy committee once we move forward with the code of conduct and subsequent policies that we've addressed. And then the next one is a policy that they recommend, which is policy 4765, which has to do with online course credit. Carl, if you want to speak more a little bit about why the rationale for that.
The reason that I think that this is particularly apt is that going forward, it seems coming out of this COVID crisis, that at least for a time, and maybe even longer, depending on what pundit we happen to be reading at the time, we're going to have sort of a mixed bag of online as well as in-person brick and mortar type instruction. That being the case, it seems to me that it behooves us to have some policy in place with respect to just exactly how that's going to work, how it's going to be credited, and so forth. So that's the reason, at least, why I'm suggesting that the administration take a look at this with the policy committee and determine whether or not a policy is appropriate, first of all, and then, of course, if it is, what it should contain.
Comment. I'd like to say that when all we had was online credit recovery, that was something that was easily enough managed by the administrators that were directly responsible for credit recovery. But as you said, Carl, I think that the role of online learning is going to expand for the foreseeable future, and we should be prepared to weigh in on what that future looks like.
Ladies and gentlemen, I see Commissioner Shepard has raised her hand. I just went back to that participant screen. Commissioner Shepard, you still there?
Yeah, I wanted to know where the conflict of interest policy should come into play, because that's one thing that has to be done in conjunction with Dr. Jello.
I believe that's why we have the agenda item tonight, Commissioner Shepard. And when we reach it, I'm sure that Dr. Jallo, and perhaps me as well, will have a word to say concerning it.
Okay, and I brought it up now because it's not on any of the, it's not in the actual table. Yeah, so we could talk about that one.
And that's a great point, because one of the things in our discussion is, if it's determined that immediate attention is required to it, we're going to need to find a place to slot it, and early, because as I recall, the legislation, and certainly Dr. Jallo will remind us as well, that's something that requires early attention with respect to her work here.
Any other questions or comments to Carl or to Kalia? Again, great job, guys. I know that Dr. Jallo is interested as well in our policy work. I hope, Dr. Jallo, this provides you some context or historical context of where we've been and also where we're going. But using that as a segue, that is the next topic on the agenda. Dr. Jallo's, one of her charges is to look at the conflict of interest policy of the Code of Ethics. Carl, do you want to introduce that topic? Or?
Yes, the board has a Code of Ethics policy. It is policy 2160. It was just last amended fairly recently in February, and it very much conforms with the Code of Ethics that's required by the general municipal law. What I would like to invite Dr. Jallo to do, if she would, and if she thinks it would be helpful, I would be happy to sit down with her and go through the current Code of Ethics to determine what, if anything, may not conform with either the general municipal law or the statute under which she was appointed.
Right, so thank you, Carl. I was going to suggest that we have a meeting about it. We did have a discussion at 2 earlier meetings today about this particular policy, and came to understand that the policy was just recently reviewed and it adheres to state statute. But certainly would welcome an opportunity to sit with you and go through it again. If there are any additional updates or changes that you want since February, perfectly willing to do that. So I would welcome that opportunity to meet with you to see if in fact the board, or if you would like to see any updates to the work done in February or completed in February.
Let me just add, Dr. Jallo referenced a meeting earlier today with the commissioner, the chancellor, vice chancellor, and Dr. Wilkins, herself, and Dr. Myers and myself. And well, that was one of the things that came up at the meeting. And to the chancellor's credit, she did indicate that that conflict of interest language may have just been a holdover. I think I'm describing this correctly, Dr. Jallo, from a prior piece of legislation, because as you all know, we're not the only district to have an independent monitor. They didn't seem to be, after the conversation and a little historical context, it's going to be a priority, of course, but I got the sense that she was not as worried about it because it seemed to be some sort of holdover language. I had even said to her, Dr. Zhao will confirm this, I even said, some of my colleagues were concerned, what was that about? Why, you know, we have our problems, but I never heard anybody say that we had a conflict of interest problem. And she said, it was sort of a holdover. Is that right, Dr. Jallo?
The language really, that language in the legislation really pertained to another district when they were crafting the legislation. But since the legislation applies to all 4 districts, it remained and was built upon. So that was not necessarily a priority for this district, but for another. The priorities for this district, I mean, we will once, like I said before, look at that policy, but the priorities for this district are fiscal and academic in nature. Those are the priorities. Everything is included, but those are the priorities versus conflict of interest, which was a priority of another district.
I see Commissioner LeBron raising her hand. I just want to mention to you all that I had that meeting, it was a couple hours ago.
Yeah, maybe 2 hours, 3 hours.
And I haven't had a chance to send you all a memo regarding it, but I will, and I will summarize what we discussed in that meeting. Commissioner LeBron?
Well, that was what I was going to reference, because since you mentioned that there was a meeting, you mentioned it publicly. This is the first time that this board as a body is even hearing about it. And these are the concerns I have as you as the board president and how you represent us in these meetings, but then you don't bring us back the information. So I will await the memo. Hopefully we wrap up tonight and you can get the memo and the information to the full board tonight.
Just so that we're clear, and the chancellor will confirm this, she called me yesterday and said, oh, did Tom, I forgot the gentleman's name, did he call you and tell you there's a meeting at noon tomorrow? I said, I haven't been told by anybody. We had the meeting today, and Commissioner LeBron, I have, as you do too, extensive responsibilities, not only to the district, but to my clients. And I just did not have a chance to get around to it. I've written you all several emails over the last few days, keeping you informed by the minute of things that our superintendent has told us. I just did not have the chance to do that. I will do it in due course and make sure you all are informed of the substance of that meeting. But I just, like you, I have other responsibilities, but I'm going to get to it, as I have with, you guys have probably received 3-4 emails from me in the last 48 hours. I'm going to get you an update on that meeting. I promise you I will. Just didn't have the time for it within the last 3 hours. But the meeting ended probably about 5 hours ago. So I'll make sure you know. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Yeah, I just want to put this on the record that I'm just a little bit concerned around the fact that there's something in this legislation we're supposed to be doing that doesn't necessarily apply to us, is what you just said. So that is a concern that I have.
I don't, Commissioner Shepard, I'm not sure if what I'm going to say is responsive to that, but I think if what you're saying is it doesn't apply to us, again, Chancellor Rose could probably explain it best, and I'm doing my best to explain it, but I think it was just sort of holdover, sort of boilerplate language that probably just stayed in the legislation. That, yeah, you're right. If what you're saying is you're concerned about why that would happen, I am too, but you know, it happens. And you know, it seems to me though, that they understood that it happened. And what I got from the chancellor was, don't worry about spending a lot of time on it. Make sure you have a conflict of interest policy that works. But I think what I got of it is, at least she honestly admitted that it wasn't something that should have been there. Make sure you have, what's that?
Can I jump in?
Yes.
The legislation is the legislation. It's in there. We are going to look at your conflict of interest policy. We're going to examine it, make sure it adheres to the state statute. And because it is part of the legislation, I don't want to give anybody the impression that it doesn't belong there. It's not going to be reviewed. It's not going to be considered. It will be. I think the sentiment that was shared with us today was that that is not a priority in this district as it is for another named district. But it's in the legislation, we're going to do it. Now that may not mean you get a new policy because your policy may be just fine. But are we going to examine the policy? Yes, we will.
All right. Any other questions or comments regarding the Code of Ethics, Conflict of Interest Policy, Standard of Conduct? All right. The next item on our agenda is Commissioner Powell.
Sorry, I do. I just want to clarify. Then does that mean it needs to go onto the table?
I'm sorry?
Does it need to go onto our deliverable table, which is why I brought it up before, is as a step in the process that it was properly reviewed. It's on the record, it's been in the table, whether it takes a couple seconds, it doesn't change, whatever, but just so that it's a part of what we do when we review policies.
I think that's a good point. So Carl, going back, and Kalia, you're suggesting, Commissioner Shepard, that it be put on that table just so we can check it off. And Dr. Jallo will check it off and we'll check it off. I think that's right. So Carl and Kalia, can you make sure that goes on the table?
We'll do so. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Commissioner Shepard. All right, Commissioner Powell, you want to give us a little background on this?
Sure. Well, this feeds right in from our previous conversation. As Carl indicated, we passed an Appendix A to Policy 2160, which was our standards of conduct. We had discussed it November, December, January, and then we finally voted on it in February of this year. The vote itself was very brief because we all understood that because of the state's legislation and the monitor assignment and legislation that we needed to have standards of conduct in place as quickly as possible. So, you know, a standard is better than no standard, regardless of whether we all agree with it or not. I did not. I felt that there were items in there that, in the original draft, that had considerable support. The straw poll attached to one of the emails indicates where the votes fell on that, and there were two items in particular that I want to bring back as amendments or additions to the standards of conduct, because we've already made a commitment to training and education. And the fact that our standards of conduct do not hold us accountable to that, a requirement that's in our Distinguished Educator Action Plan, it's in the Distinguished Educator's recommendations, and yet we, by whatever means, chose not to hold ourselves accountable to that, I felt was a serious shortcoming. So the language I'm proposing be inserted as an amendment is a new bullet stating keep abreast of issues in education, and the next bullet, participate in training relevant to board service. Those are pretty generic and don't necessarily hold us to a very, very high bar of standard, but it's like the standard of conduct itself, it's better than nothing. It's better than being silent to that point. And so I asked that we consider those insertions that did have a supermajority in straw poll votes, but rather than having the code of the standards of conduct be held up over debate over the finer points. My vote was to approve the standards that had unanimous support, and then tackle those that had some dissension after the fact, and that's now. You're muted.
I see Commissioner LeBron raising her hand.
Yeah, so as Commissioner Powell started, this conversation we've had these conversations extensively. To bring it back up now, it didn't make the cut. This is the frustrating part about being on this board, is the repetitive conversations that we have. And we should be doing the education and the training that we need to be doing. That should not have to be in writing. That's part of our job. It's part of our job description as a board member. But the fact that it's coming back up again, this is exactly the part that it's frustrating to me. The fact that we already voted on it, that we move forward as a body, that the supermajority voted to not have the language in there for whatever reason. I can't tell you why every single commissioner who did not support the language the first 3 times we had the conversation and talked about it to death, why we did not move forward with it for every single commissioner. But I can tell you for myself, that is a standard that should not have to be put in writing. We should already be doing those things. And some of it is open to interpretation of what is a breadth education. So I'm not supporting this. I'm going to support what we originally passed as a body of a board already, and say that we keep things moving. We have a million other things to be talking about, worried about, and having conversations about, then going back to conversations that we had several meetings and extensive drawn out conversations about, and already voted and decided.
To that point, I would say that
I don't need no rebuttals from you. You can raise your hand if Van wants to call on you, but you don't need to rebuttal me.
Well, this was my introduction. I think I do have the right to rebut, refute, or add to the conversation. And the conversation was at the time that this received 5 straw poll votes. That's a supermajority. And the reason we're talking about it now is because there was a need to get the standard of conduct moving forward despite the tyranny of a minority. And so let people cast their votes, okay?
It received 5, but you guys had over like 30 recommendations for a document that you're not going to follow. You're not going to go back and review and read. So there's no point to this. This is my whole point. We are wasting time once again having these conversations on a document that this board will not follow. It is ridiculous. We've already exhausted this conversation to death. It had 5 votes, but there were certainly a number of these recommendations that had the full 7 and 6. And that's why the board decided to go forward with the 6 and the 7s. That was it.
If this is a question about what's going to be followed and what's not going to be followed, then why would we bother adhering to this Distinguished Educators Report, which has this as one of its recommendations?
You guys don't follow everything in the Distinguished Educators Report. In fact, you ignored half of his actual recommendations that were not in writing, his suggestions that made sense. This board ignored those.
Listen, it would be best if this could be a conversation, not a debate. Does anybody else want to add to the conversation about Commissioner Powell's recommendation? Then I will add my opinion. This, as Commissioner Powell says, these 2 items, keep abreast of issues in education and participating in training for board service, are admittedly pretty standard things that we should be doing. So in my mind, I don't see why we wouldn't add them as standards of conduct. And in fact, we're arguably doing both of those things, and we have a track record for doing those things. So I don't know the observation that we're not doing what we say we're going to do is accurate. We just prove with our policy stuff we do follow through on our policies. But to this point,
You don't follow your policy.
Commissioner
You don't
LeBron,
follow policy.
Commissioner LeBron, I did not interrupt you. I'd ask for the same courtesy.
No.
With respect to this issue, we clearly have gotten board training. We've had a number of sessions where our own Carl Christoph has offered up training on a variety of issues. We've had retreats where we've had training. So I don't necessarily think that it's accurate to say that if we put something down, we won't do it. We're already doing some of this stuff. So I think these are pretty innocuous standards, but standards that we should put in writing, and standards which, by the way, find their way into our DE report. We do call for training in our DE report. And as you all know, we're monitoring what we do in our DE action plan with JIRA. We do have in our DE report that we should keep, not the words of keep abreast of education is not in there, but certainly participate in training is. So I think these are good standards, and while and I just want to correct something. My observation was, for those who recall the number of meetings, and Commissioner LeBron is correct, we had a number of meetings on this, and they were good meetings. It was important that we dedicate the time to discuss those things. And ultimately, what we decided was, after meeting and meeting, we had to move it along. We had to come up with some basic things so that we could have standards of conduct. And so what we ended up doing was, okay, let's go with the things that have 7. But it never precluded the possibility that we could revisit this conversation. And in fact, I remember
to bring back something that was already voted on. No, you guys are not following Robert's rules. This was already a voted on item. So I'm going to go grab my Robert's rules book and look this up. Because you're not following Robert's rules. That's not how it works. Once a vote has already occurred, we move forward. Now, there are rules. Robert's rules indicates that there are certain procedures that need to be followed to bring something back up to the floor, and we're not following it.
One of the rules that we have in our standards of conduct is we respect each other. We let each other finish. One of the rules that we have in our bylaws says that the board president recognizes speakers. I will recognize you, Commissioner LeBron, but you got to let people have the courtesy of finishing what they're saying. The only other thing I was going to mention is that, Carl, I see you're raising your hand, and Commissioner LeBron, if you want to say something after Carl, you can. Carl?
Muted.
Forgive me, I was muted. As a matter of parliamentary procedure, I was just going to suggest that if you want to treat Commissioner Powell's opening statement as a motion to amend, if you have a second, then Commissioner LeBron will have the opportunity to state an objection to the consideration of the matter at this time, based upon the rule that I guess she's in the process of looking up. Then the board can, there can be a ruling on the objection, and you can move forward, and perhaps we'll save a little time.
Well, the problem is that they've already indicated and started this whole conversation out of order. So the fact that you guys want to go back now and fix the mistake and not follow Robert's rules is problematic. It's problematic. And this happens all the time. You want to put something in it, put something about people on this board not being racist. That's something I'll stand behind. Put something about that language in there.
Well, Commissioner LeBron, if you want to raise that as an issue, you absolutely can. We've talked about racism, but
you talk about it, but you don't do nothing about it, Van, and you witnessed it with your white colleagues all the time.
Well, Commissioner LeBron, let's keep this conversation on point. If you want to talk about racism, we can do that. But right now, I assume there is a motion by Commissioner Powell to revisit this conversation, which we had said.
It wasn't a motion. It wasn't a motion. We've
Commissioner
already started having
Commissioner LeBron,
about it.
Commissioner LeBron, you're talking about Robert's Rules of Order and you don't abide by them. You repeatedly interrupt people. So there is a motion by Commissioner Powell. Is there a second?
Seconded.
It's been seconded by Commissioner Malloy. Now, Commissioner LeBron, do you want to say something further or in response to that motion?
I'm looking up the actual order because that's not how this works. And of course, Amy is going to second the motion.
Well, she has the right to second anybody's motion. And Carl is as you know, is our parliamentarian. He clarified the rules upon how this gets back on the floor. Don't have to spend a lot of time talking about this. Our parliamentarian said that it is now properly before the body. Is there any other conversation about the motion? Carl, are you raising your hand, or is that an old hand raise?
I guess I'm raising it again. The point now is that Commissioner LeBron has an objection. It should be stated, and then the objection can be ruled upon. And if the chair's ruling is disagreed with, of course, there can be a motion to overturn the chair. But if we treat this in order, then we'll be able to get through it in an organized fashion. And all that the committee is doing at this moment, incidentally, is determining whether or not to refer the matter to the whole board. And in that event, the rule that I think Commissioner LeBron is in the process of looking up will say that there has to be a certain amount of notice, and the wording, of course, has to be presented. And all of that is consistent with the board's policy on how it deals with its own policies.
I see Commissioner Elliott is raising, Vice President Elliott is raising her hand.
Yes, before I'm to vote on something, and I apologize for being late. What's the discussion?
The quickest way to summarize it is, you recall a couple meetings ago, policy, I think it was the last policy meeting, Commissioner Powell said that there were 2 items that she'd like to see included in our standards of conduct that were previously gotten 5 votes. You remember that whole process, Vice President Elliott, where we came up with a list of standards of conduct for the board. And the 2 that got 5 votes, but not 7, were keeping abreast of issues relating to education. The other one was participating in training for board service. So Commissioner Powell made a motion to basically revisit that conversation. It was seconded by Commissioner Malloy. And now we're in the process of talking about that revision to our standards of conduct and whether we will send this to the full board for consideration of changing our standards of conduct to include those 2. You with me?
Yeah, but since I wasn't a part of the conversation, I'm probably going to vote no on it, only because I was not a part of the conversation to really understand the different viewpoints. So sure. I'll just say that.
Sure. Is there, Commissioner LeBron, do you care to continue to articulate your objection to either the process or
I don't want to play this game with you and Willa, and these are the games you play. We already voted on this. It already passed as it was. And it's not even the principle of what is being asked to be added. You guys should be doing that. As adults, you should be doing that, period. But the fact that you want to bring it back up a few months later, because when you guys do not get the votes the way that you wanted to, this is exactly how you both operate, in sync, in the exact same way. It's nonsense. That's all I'm going to say. I have nothing else to say. My vote is no. As a matter of fact, I'm making a motion for immediate vote.
Commissioner Powell. Commissioner Powell, and then, Commissioner Powell.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know if I was muted or unmuted. So Commissioner Elliott, you haven't really missed anything in the conversation. We did talk about this last month, but the email where I recommended those bullet points didn't make it out to the whole committee or to the whole board with sufficient time for people to consider it before the last policy meeting. And that's why it's here in front of us again today. As Carl said, from a procedural standpoint, having it introduced to the agenda is sufficient for committee work. The process of amending a policy is a multi-step process. It requires a discussion item, an information item, discussion item, an action item. She's not wrong about that, but we're not there. We're in committee right now. And so we still have an opportunity to have a full-throated dialogue about this. And I say again, I don't know what the motivations of other people were, but I conceded to voting on a bare minimum standard of conduct for the purpose of expediting it, to make sure that we had something rather than nothing. I don't understand the objections. Commissioner LeBron has already conceded that it's something that we should be doing, and she conceded that it is in the Distinguished Educators Report and part of our response to the Distinguished Educator. So I honestly cannot comprehend anyone would be in any real opposition.
To comprehend nothing. How I make decisions, or none of my actions do you need to comprehend. It's not your job. Your job is to comprehend the things you say and do, not mine.
Anybody else want to be heard on the subject?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Vice President Elliott.
Yeah, I just want to, so the process that we are undertaking now is to just have it as a part of the discussion to include those items in whatever. I'm not exactly sure what we're talking about, in all honesty, but to include it in those protocols that we're good. Okay, all right, thank you.
And let me further add the conversation. I see you, Commissioner Adams. Let me just add this. The conversation is to have that conversation before the full board. You know how we, in our committees, we refer something to the full board. So if the vote is 4-3 or 5-2, it would be go up to the full board, and we would have the conversation again. So nothing is being finalized by your vote today. Commissioner Adams, I saw you raise your hand.
So I had my hand raised to explain about it going to the full board, which is really don't make a lot of sense to me, because this is a full board right here. It is. So it's repeating something. And since I've been on the board, which hasn't been that long, I can't think of a topic that we've talked about more. I can't think of a topic that we've discussed more, spent more time on. And I just need to say that I'm going to vote the same way I voted before, man. I mean, you can send it to the full board. You can send it to many boards as you want. I'm still have the same opinion about this.
I see Commissioner Powell raising her hand.
Thanks. You're absolutely right, Commissioner Adams, that we have talked about this at great length. But this is the standards by which we hold ourselves accountable, which the community holds us accountable. And the process of actually adopting it to the full board, the distinction between where we're at now and where we would be when we adopt it, is that in the interim, during the discussion item, that's been introduced to the public for public comment and consumption. So that's the whole reason why it takes so long to get from an idea presented in committee to voting on it as an amendment to our policy. Does that make sense?
So what makes sense to me is this is going to determine a lot of stuff that I my ethics and morals that I live by. It's some things that's just a natural for me. It really is. Loving kids and all that. We might as well put all that in there. I just don't see the point of us spending this time. We're getting laid off and all kind of stuff, and we're here right now.
Again, I want to point out something Commissioner LeBron said earlier on. I took it as a call to question comment, and our parliamentarian will correct me, but you cannot call a question that will result in cutting off debate. Now, but I think, I see Carl nodding his head. But I think we're at that point where we don't need to talk about this anymore. And I and Commissioner Powell and whoever else would agree to this is not calling for extensive debate. We've spent maybe 15 minutes, and I assume others are ready to move on. So let's unless there's some objection, let's vote on whether this proposal to amend the standards of conduct to include keeping abreast of educational issues and to participate in ongoing training regarding board service, whether that proposal will be recommended to the full board for consideration at its next full board meeting. Did I articulate that good enough, Carl, as a motion? Or does that represent what you want to do, Commissioner Powell? All right, I think.
Yes, and it's articulated correctly.
All right. So all those in favor of making this referral to the full board, I hear what you're saying, Ricardo, we are the full board, but that's our rules from committee. indicate by saying aye. Aye.
President White.
No.
I would like all board members to please come on to the screen. Commissioner Shepard, are you still with us?
You need me to call that vote again?
Yes, please.
Okay, all those in favor of the referring the matter as described by myself a few minutes ago to the full board for further consideration, doesn't have to be a long consideration, indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
No.
Oh.
Aye. I'll go aye.
All right, it seems to me that the matter, did Commissioner Shepard vote or did I miss that?
Unfortunately, I think she is, I see her name, but I don't see her on screen, so I don't know if she's having technical issues. For this vote, President White, you do need a supermajority.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. I think I disagree with that because this is bylaws.
I'll ask Carl to jump in, please.
Yeah, jump in, Carl.
Yes, a majority vote is sufficient to move it out of committee to the full board. But one of the distinctions, since we're drawing distinctions between committee of the whole and the full board, it will take a 2/3 vote of the full board to amend the policy.
Carl, can I dispute that? Because this is not bylaws.
I don't want you to be disputing our legal counsel. That's the other thing that you tend to do. That is
Commissioner LeBron.
You correct Willa. You correct Willa from telling counsel.
Commissioner LeBron, I'm not going to correct you.
Listen to counsel on everything else except for when it's convenient.
Commissioner LeBron, I'm not going to correct you or Commissioner Powell. I'm going to let each of you have the opportunity to speak. Carl, do you want to respond to what Commissioner Powell said, please?
Yes. And technically, I think it's going to depend on how it's presented. If it's presented as a motion to reconsider and amend, it's going to require 2/3. If it's a straight up motion to amend after passage of appropriate time and with the process also as appropriate in our policy, then only a majority vote will be necessary. So it just depends on how it's going to be presented.
Okay. Any further conversation about that? If there is to be any, can be completed by Mr. Christoph and others who want to further have the conversation with him. And by the time we have our meeting, that issue will be clarified and resolved by all parties.
I just want to point out that when we voted on it, it did take a majority, more than a majority of the board. In order to vote on it last time, it required 5 or more board members to vote yes on it.
Okay, so here's my point.
Amendment should require 5 or more votes as well.
Here's my point. We can have that conversation offline and a definitive answer can be offered at the beginning of our meeting where this proposed amendment will take place. We don't need to litigate that or argue that now. And in fact, it is 7:21. We're actually ahead of schedule. The next item on the agenda would be to go into executive session. Carl, were you going to say something? I'm really trying to move this along. Carl?
I want to jump in.
Nothing further.
Hold on. Carl, go ahead.
I have nothing further at this point. I think the issue has been joined, if you will.
That's right. Marisol, yep.
Commissioner Shepard is back on. I think she was having some technical issues. I know that we took the roll call for the vote and the vote passes, but I don't know if you wanted to record her vote.
Oh, absolutely. Commissioner Shepard.
It's not necessary. I was having technical difficulties myself. There was somebody at my door, so I had to go see. I've been ordering off Amazon a lot now that I have a lot of time at home. So it was a package, but either way, it doesn't really matter. It's already passed, and I'm fine with moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Adams. Is that an old hand raised or?
No, I just have to say this. It's important that we be honest here. And if we're going to be trying to get these things put in place, what I do recall clearly is that we did have a training and nobody everybody didn't participate in it. When we had Dr. Malik come in. So we can't be talking about putting these things in place and then we ain't really participating when somebody say something criticize us about something, all of a sudden we don't want to participate. We got to be real. We got to keep it real here, man. For us to move forward in a different path, and have some different kind of results, we got to do things different. We got to be honest. That's what I got to say.
So Commissioner Adams, if I could, just for clarity, when you say, just so, because everybody doesn't know who was there, when you say we didn't participate, everybody was there, but they didn't, you're saying there were points that they didn't participate. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. They just had their body there. They did not, if you're not participating in their training, you're just there, you're not, come on, that's nothing. You're not taking a critique. When somebody says something, you're arguing that back. It was good. It was good participation out of most people, including yourself.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Superintendent Myers?
Sure. Thank you, President White. I just wanted to remind everyone on screen, board commissioners, staff, and the public, we each are connected to one or more young person. And I just continue to be concerned about what our young people experienced over the weekend and what they've experienced historically. So if we can just each make the commitment to checking and connecting with those young people who are in our lives, I think that is critically important. I just want to reiterate that point. Our students are struggling, and please make sure that we're connecting with our young people.
All right. On that note, thank you, Dr. Myers. We've completed our agenda items for now. We do have to go into executive session. I want to end on a high note. It is 7:25. The agenda says that we're to be done at 7:30. So kudos to everybody for keeping us on point. I see Vice President Elliott has raised her hand. Yep. Vice President Elliott.
And I hope I don't break down on this, but I just want to say to the Black men, I love you. That's my colleagues here on the board, in the district, out in the community. It's just so much going on. And I just want to say to the people in the community that we be safe, that we protect ourselves, that we look out for each other. These are tough times, difficult times, and they may get worse. And we don't know the other side of this. We're seeing some of this. We see the protests, but then we see these rioters. I tend to believe that this is a higher plan of something that's going on. And so I would just say, protect yourselves. And Black men doesn't get it enough in terms of the love and the nurtures and support that we should be giving our Black men, and all that a Black man has to deal with out on those streets, the fear of just being on the streets and having to be stopped by a police officer. We have too many instances of that in our modern times, and we have too many instances of that historically. And I just, my heart goes out, my prayers go out. You know, this is, I took the time off so that I could watch the news, and I cried like a baby. And so please take care of yourselves and know, Black men, that we love you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. Commissioner Powell, is that no, that is not a hand raise.
It is. It is.
Yes.
It is. As we wrap up, someone sent me a text asking, did I know the flag was upside down? Yes, I know the flag is upside down. In the Navy, when a ship is in distress, the flag is flown upside down so that other ships can know without, from a distance, that it's in distress. This was my way of saying we as a nation are in distress. I have particular worries and concerns about National Guardsmen and active duty soldiers being called up to exercise crowd control over their fellow Americans. And I'm worried that this is essentially a civil war, brother against brother and father against son. And it, like yourself, Cynthia, I am beside myself with concern for our nation's future. And this background was just my way of saying that I believe that we are a nation in distress right now.
Thank you all for your comments, Dr. Myers, Vice President Elliott, and Commissioner Powell. I need a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of obtaining legal advice from our general counsel.
Motion.
Is there a motion? Been moved by Commissioner Adams, seconded by Commissioner Malloy. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Ladies and gentlemen, this will conclude our meeting. As we are discussing these things in the executive session with our attorney, we will conclude our meeting after that executive session is over. Good night and be safe.